Okay, good morning again, everyone. Welcome to our Bristol Fundraising Group talk today with Emma Harvey from Trinity Community Arts. Emma is the CEO of Trinity, a Bristol charity and art space with community at its core. And Emma's been involved in a campaign for the last year or so. I won't say too much, Emma, because I'll let you cover the details, but to save and revive Jacob Wells, a Grade 2 listed building in Hotwells in Bristol that has previously lain dormant and has had loads of success attracting funding from lots of different sources and building lots of local support for the project. So we wanted to invite Emma along this morning to just talk a little bit about how she and Trinity have done it, and then to share some general tips for kind of managing a big capital project, both internally and externally, and attracting local support for that. So I'm going to hand over to you, Emma. Really looking forward to hearing from you. And just a reminder to anyone, feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go. We'll come to those at the end, and there'll be an opportunity to unmute and ask questions at the end as well. So thank you very much, and over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, I'm Emma, and I'm the Chief Executive of Trinity. I'm just going to do a bit of kind of descriptions as we go along, visual descriptions for anyone with a visual impairment. So I'm a white woman in her 40s. I'm wearing a black shirt with yellow sunflower earrings. I'm just going to share my screen now. So hopefully that's come up. So the building that we're talking about today is pictured on the screen. It's a big red fronted building with red brick and kind of bath kind of stone. There's some people stood outside the front of the building, and it's a really large kind of building, so the people look very tiny. The slide's got the Trinity logo on and a title, Capital Fundraising, and there's also a picture of the Trinity Centre Towers with some scaffolding on it, just to give you a bit of kind of context. I'm just going to see if I can skip through this. There we go. Right. So just for people who don't know what Trinity is, Trinity, as Mike said, our mission is to empower communities through art, and we do that through providing opportunities for communities of different ages and backgrounds to access arts and cultural activities. We do that because we believe in the power of art to enhance people's well-being and empower them to take action about the things that matter to them. And we also believe that arts and culture is a big stimulator for local economies to help people generate income and improve their life chances. So our programme is super diverse. If anyone's come along to anything at Trinity, we do really have quite a broad spectrum of activities, from kind of live music and sound system nights to kind of baby and toddler groups, to kind of theatre performances and dance groups of all ages, and a variety of other things. So it's really about using arts and cultural activities as a vehicle for people to kind of take part, have fun, learn new skills, and make connections with one another. The impact of our work, we work with sort of over 75,000 people a year, from our kind of live audience of about sort of 40,000 people, but also for a kind of regular programme of community activities. And the impact of that is, you know, aside from having fun and inspirational, joyful experiences, the activities that we provide also give people a chance to connect with one another, develop their skills, and also, like I said, to connect with one another and to take action about the things that matter to them as well. So there's a picture on the side of this slide of the front of Trinity. It's a big stone, bath stone building. It's got 2 towers, and it's quite dramatic. There's a kind of queue of people out the front. That's one of our garden parties where people have to queue up to get in. Super popular event. The background to our kind of capital works and why we've ended up kind of pursuing this Jacob Wells project is, as the Trinity Centre is a Grade 2 star listed building, we've undertaken several schemes of capital works on that building. It's a building that's owned by the local authority, and we lease it on a peppercorn lease. And we take on full repairing and insuring liability for that building. So over the last sort of just over 10 years, we've been investing in the building to repair it and renovate it over a phased sort of £3 million programme. And recent sort of schemes include a Power to Change funded bit of infrastructure that we put in, some sort of outdoor kitchen and bar units, and a kind of pop-up tent that allows us to do kind of more outdoor events and live music program. And also we've sort of done sort of past structural repairs funded by Historic England and Heritage Lottery. So the picture on this slide is the building sort of surrounded by a huge amount of scaffolding, which is always one of the most expensive elements of a capital project, is just kind of getting up to do the work ends up being a big part of the cost. We also did some redevelopment of our upstairs hall space with some support from Big Lottery Reaching Community Buildings about 10 years ago. And we've sort of taken this phased approach to the building. Pre-COVID, we managed to deliver all of our capital schemes without having to close the building. And it was a really important kind of driving factor for us to keep the building open so that we'd sort of maintain community connection and engagement. Obviously, COVID kind of interrupted that, but up until then, we managed to keep it open. So as then part of that phasing approach, it's also then allowed us to kind of use the kind of small discrete funds where they're available to kind of do little bits of kind of interventions along the way to make sure that the building sort of stays relevant and responsive to communities. So at the moment we've embarked on a kind of second project to save Jacob's Wells. So Jacob's Wells Baths was a former bathhouse in Hotwells. It was actually a building that was built for the people of Bristol in response to kind of what it was called the cry for the poor at the time in Victorian era, where people were struggling with their health, and they kind of made a demand on the city to have improved health and well-being, and one of the things was to put this pool in. So it's a really large Victorian piece of infrastructure and sort of Victorian engineering. It's a huge space with a very high kind of arched glass ceiling, and it's got one central hall space, which is pictured at the moment in this picture, which looks like a bit of a building site, and there's 4 people stood in front of what looks like a very sad space at the moment, but still with bags of potential. And so at the end of 2022, after a kind of a lengthy period of the building sat closed and inoccupied, there was the intent to reinstate it as a swimming pool, and sadly the plans fell through due to costs and inability to secure funding to deliver that scheme. It was quite a complicated, expensive scheme. It was sort of getting up into the region of sort of £10 million to reinstate the pool, and because it hadn't really been operating as a pool for about sort of 30 years, it'd been a community dance centre. What they were really looking at doing was putting a new build pool behind a Victorian's facade. So it was quite an expensive and potentially complicated way to put what would be actually in today's circumstances a very small pool back into the centre of Bristol. So as this building is also owned by Bristol City Council, this sort of placed the building at quite a serious kind of threat of loss. And, you know, with the council's pressure on their own budgets to balance their books, they've been doing a lot of estates rationalisation exercises to dispose of properties within their portfolio. And this was one of the buildings that has obviously sat on their books for a really long time, and they've struggled to sort of realise a viable scheme for it. Like I said, it was a dance centre for about 30 years, but over that time, it sort of struggled to scale to a degree where that group were able to kind of take on the ongoing repairs and maintenance liability of the building. So because Trinity had actually been involved in an original community asset transfer for this building back in 2018 as part of a partnership proposal with a number of other arts organisations, we sort of had this building on our radar. And at the time, we didn't lead a bid because we were delivering a big capital scheme at Trinity. But in the sort of 2022, we're in a slightly different position with slightly more capacity, potentially, slightly further along ourselves in our own business development model. So we felt like it was potentially a good time to give this another go and to sort of try and launch a campaign with support of the local community association to see if we could raise the profile of the risk to this building and save the space. So really what it started out of was really just a kind of an appeal to consider not disposing of the building, as opposed to us having any real plan at that point when we started the campaign in 2023, at the beginning of the year. And over the year it sort of grew and evolved with community support and backing to kind of shape what ended up being quite a kind of strong and compelling vision for that space that's managed to attract support both from the local authority, who's given us a long leasehold offer, as well as from funders who have sort of supported the vision for reinstating Jacobs Wells as a community and cultural asset. So the slide describes a little bit about that kind of vision. So really what we're trying to do is bring the building back into use as a kind of multi-use civic and cultural hub for central Bristol. I don't know if many people know the area, but it's quite a diverse area, both in terms of age and ethnicity and kind of social economic diversity. So there's the building sits between two social housing blocks, but obviously it's in Clifton as well, so it's it's in quite a proximity to one of the wealthier areas of the city. But then there's also quite a limited space for kind of civic and youth provision. So there really is kind of not very much else available within the locality where people can kind of come and create and use space for their own community sort of purposes. So our aim is to kind of really work with the building's 30-year dance heritage and reinstate the space as a home for dance. So when it was in its height of dance centre use, it was being used by about 1,000 people a week, as well as sort of for rehearsals for some of the touring shows that go to like Hippodrome, as well as sort of site-specific performances that companies like Mayfest bring to the city, where those works may be quite big, and so they need quite a large space in order to be able to host them in the city. And so through this campaign, we've been working with a number of community stakeholders, both to kind of promote the heritage of the building. So this story of it being this kind of space that was always intended for civic use, and sort of take on responsibility for the building through a community asset transfer, and promote a kind of model of community asset guardianship. So with lots of local authorities across the country facing a lot of pressure to dispose of the buildings that they own and the buildings that we might know and love, we're trying to show that maybe there's a sort of slightly different approach that we can work as the voluntary sector with local authorities to try and ease some of that financial burden, and also to provide relevant community and cultural spaces for people within our localities. So we've developed a phased approach. I love a bit of phasing, as I've just said, from Trinity, and the idea being that we are trying to work with the funding that's available and work in a kind of as modest a scheme as is practically possible in order to make sure that we deliver a timely and kind of realisable capital works scheme. So what we're trying to avoid is a big sort of £25 million target that we might never realise. And even if we did realise it, by the time we realised it, the children and young people who are living in the social housing blocks nearby have already grown up and moved on. So there's children and young people and older people within the locality, as well as artists who are looking for space now. So we're trying to respond to a need as it exists now, not a need that may or may not exist in the future. So we've sort of split it into a few phases. We're in a kind of development phase at the moment where we're continuing to deliver a number of surveys. We're also delivering an emergency phase of preventative measures to try and stop any further damage. And then the main scheme is split into two distinct phases, one which is on repairing the asset and kind of recovering it as a community space. And then the second phase, which would focus more on kind of renovations and improvements. There's also a kind of a plan that we're developing around kind of, decarbonising the building. And that piece of work's being supported by a firm called Borough Happold, who are kind of helping us to look at how we can make sure the building is sustainable. So this slide has just got just a bit of a summary of how we've sort of split that phase and kind of the funds that we're raising or in the process of raising. So like I said, we're in a development phase at the moment, and that development phase has been supported by a local trust, Nisbet, and they were really a critical funder that has been pivotal in us being able to proceed with this project. One of the complicated things about capital projects is everybody wants to be the last funder and nobody really wants to be the first funder. So we've been supported by Nisbet Trust over a number of years, both through our revenue grants for our children and young people services, as well as with some capital grant support to improve our graffiti room in the upstairs hall of Trinity. So we already had quite a good dialogue with them as a funder, and they're obviously a local funder, so they know of Jacobs Wells as well. And through also the community campaign and some of the social media and kind of local media coverage that we had, it really sort of piqued their interest in the project. And sort of in dialogue with them, I sort of explained that, well, we will never get this project off the ground if we don't have some development money now, so that we could start to look in more detail about the condition of the building and to sort of firm up costs for future phases, because otherwise we're just dealing in a kind of an abstract. So they were super supportive of that approach, and they were the first funder to pledge, and that really did create a bit of a snowball effect for other funders to then get on board. So with the development phase, we received some support from some other trusts and foundations, so Architectural Heritage Fund and Community Ownership Fund also have a support grant, so we received some support from them. And we also have received some support from Historic England, who have funded a discrete emergency repairs phase as part of this development phase. That's also going to give us a bit more access to the stone work at height, so we can assess the condition a bit further. So that's a phase that's in progress, and we'll hopefully be completing that phase by the start of the new financial year, so the 1st of April. And then we're moving into the phase 1 repairs, and so far we've secured 1.4 million of our 1.9 million pound target. The bulk of that's come from Community Ownership Fund, so it's a big national fund run by the Department of Levelling Up Homes and Communities. It's a fund that sort of morphed and changed over time. So when the fund was first launched, the maximum grant you could apply for was 250,000, and you had to have, I think, 50% match, I think it was. And over the course of the department administrating that grant and working with the VCS support group locality to kind of, in response to feedback to some of the challenges of that fund, some of the parameters of that fund has changed, so the maximum amount that you can ask for has changed, as well as the reduced requirement for match, so only 20% match is now needed. And so we've also then, through that phase, we have 400,000 committed, so we've got 200,000 pledge from Nisbet, 100,000 pledge from John James Foundation, and another 100,000 from another private trust and foundation. And what's been great about this project is it's actually the first time that we've managed to leverage support from John James Foundation, which is really great. They're a funder that we've sort of historically tried to approach through other kind of programs and schemes and never really kind of piqued their interest. And I think this project has probably attracted their interest, similar reasons to Nisbet, in that it's very local, it's very kind of timely, and the building is very iconic within the Clifton and Hotwells area. So I think everybody's been walking past it for a number of years with that kind of dreamy look in their eyes of like, wouldn't it be wonderful if this, somebody were to do something with this building? And because it is a bit of a last chance saloon now, I think that's really galvanized hearts and minds in terms of support. So We've got a £500,000 target outstanding for this phase, and we do have some live applications and decisions out in the ether at the moment. So Foyle Foundation is one of the funders who are kind of ending their capital scheme, but we've got a kind of stage. We've been invited from to make a full application to them, so we're applying to them, and hopefully there'll be some further support we'll be able to lever from Historic England, who've obviously supported the development phase, as well as a number of other sort of kind of smaller, kind of mid-scale trusts and foundations, which they are the ones that I think we kind of need to scoop up at the end. You know, the people that kind of give in the region of sort of 25 to 50,000, they'll be the applications we try and pick up towards the end. So this phase, even though we've called it phase 1 repairs, there's probably going to be some splitting out of this phase as well. So there'll be some site preparation and enabling works that will commence in the spring, and then that will lead into the main kind of repair stage in the summer, because it's largely going to be a roof repair scheme. We want to start that bit when the weather's as good as it possibly can be in the UK. And then phase 2, that's the least kind of formalized phase at the moment. And the reason for that is because we want to do a National Lottery Heritage application for the phase 2. And so within that, there'll be a 2-stage process where we'll do a further development phase where we'll be looking more in depth at what improvements can really respond to community needs and interests, and then kind of delivering a further kind of funding effort in order to close the gap to deliver that scheme that will run us into the end of 2026, into the beginning of 2027. So that's kind of a bit of a broad kind of brush overview of our approach to this scheme. And the kind of the purpose, I guess, of the phasing is really just to give us the best possible chance that we can deliver a realisable scheme in a timely manner. A lot of this project has really come down to community engagement and also the kind of like research in the run-up to this. So as I mentioned, Trinity had been involved in a kind of 2017, 2018 bid for community asset transfer that was unsuccessful, but actually meant that we had quite a large amount of legacy information about the building. So we'd had quite a lot of stakeholder information, a feasibility study that had been carried out in 2017. We also then, you know, we kind of knew a number of the kind of main kind of stakeholders in the area that had been super passionate about the previous scheme. So we were sort of able to kind of pick up quite quickly at the start of 2023 with the community campaign to save the space. The most important thing I think about the community campaign was when the petition was launched. It was actually launched by the Hotwells and Harbourside Community Association to save the building. So it wasn't a petition that to save the space that was led by us. It was a petition that was launched by the Community Association. So when it sort of first, and it was quite a short petition, it was only up, I think, for, you know, we only really pushed it for about a month. And so that we had sort of over 1,000 signatures very quickly that sort of helped to demonstrate that there was a bit of interest in the building. We also did a lot of work with the local councillors in the area that were very committed to seeing something positive happen for the building. So over the course of sort of 6 to 8 months between sort of January to sort of August, we worked with as many kind of community stakeholders as we could to try and put this project on their radar and get letters of support, not just, I guess, for our own kind of understanding, I guess, of whether or not this was a sort of viable business or a viable prospect, but also so that we could demonstrate to funders that there was local buy-in to the vision for this space to be relaunched and repurposed as a community and cultural asset. And so we received a number of support letters, both from kind of local MP to community partners and youth partners like Young Bristol, and also sort of future tenants like Bristol School of Acting, who are kind of looking for additional space within the area, and the Jacobs Wells Community Hub group that used to be based in the centre. We undertook a series of regular meetings with a kind of community steering group, and also attended a number of neighbourhood forums. And the neighbourhood forums of Clifton, Hotwells and Harbourside are quite well attended, sort of anywhere between sort of 60 to sort of 200 people were coming to some of the bigger meetings. So it's quite an active community association that it's quite then easy to kind of tap into in terms of having conversations and getting this project on people's radar. We did sort of the standard desk-based stuff as well, like launching a survey, and there's a kind of a very light touch survey interface called Polis, pol.is, which is where people can kind of put their own questions and comments, and then people can kind of like or downvote them. And it's just a way then of kind of people almost surveying other people about their own ideas. So it kind of creates a space for other people to say, I'd really like it to be a pool again. And then people can vote whether they want to see that or not, rather than us shaping that agenda. So it's quite a nifty little bit of, it's just a web browser interface, but it just kind of gets a bit more at the heart of what people want, as opposed to us just being really formulaic and kind of leading with our own questions. And we also met with some of the residents in the neighbouring housing blocks to kind of have chats with them about what they were sort of hoping for, and sort of hosted some kind of sort of sector meetups as well within the watershed and Bristol Beacon. They kindly hosted a number of meetings for us, so that was really helpful. And then we've also just looked into sort of through desk-based research, we've managed to work with locality to use their what they call local insight reports, which kind of gives a bit more detail about the kind of demographic makeup of a particular locality, but they can split it by lower super output areas rather than just splitting it by ward. So you can kind of get, again, to see a bit more of what the need is within the hyper-local context, as opposed to just looking at, say, Clifton or Hotwells and Harbourside as kind of one area. We're sort of looking really in depth at what's going on within each locality. And that data was really helpful because it sort of showed us actually there is quite a high need within the locality, both in terms of socioeconomic deprivation, as well as a need. There's quite a high number of older people living in isolation on their own, people not running cars, people also quite transient communities, so people who are kind of have moved to the UK for the first time and living in that area in houses of multiple occupancy. So there's quite a mix going on within quite a small, densely populated sort of postcode area. And we also then did some work working with local artists. There's a lot of artists based obviously in Bristol, and Clifton, Hotwells and Harbourside is no different. So working with local artists to help us design sort of assets, I guess, sort of campaign assets to give the campaign a bit of character. And so one of the pictures on this slide is a kind of watercolour illustration that a local artist has painted, I think, kind of really lovingly, and that kind of helps to elevate the project. So just kind of put some key learnings up before we get into questions. I think the main things, I think, with capital project is like always looping it back to the people and the impact. So it can be really tempting to kind of focus on your kind of fundraising target and what the fundraising target is going to enable you to do in terms of bricks and mortar, but really kind of making sure that you're connecting that into the vision for the space and how that vision is going to manifest sort of practically within your space. Getting your applications in as early as practically possible, because everything takes time, and your capital program will take a huge amount of time as well. So making sure that you kind of understand when like key decisions are going to be made, and making sure that you're kind of timing these things as well as possible to give yourself the best possible chance that you can then realise the spend of that money when and if you receive it. because obviously funds always come with conditions, and sometimes those conditions aren't very sympathetic to your capital works timeline. There is a lot of support within Bristol, both in terms of sort of professional team, architect firms, structural engineers, solicitors, you know, like I said, Borough Happold have a scheme where they give time to look into kind of decarbonising both capital schemes and buildings. So there's a number of different social, you know, firms with kind of civic social responsibility within their remit, and so try and make use of those where you can, particularly in those early stages, so that you can strengthen your applications and make sure that you're being really clear about your ask. It helps to move it from the abstract into something that feels like a real tangible capital project. And just there isn't really a quick win for capital projects. As a fundraiser in particular, you have to invest time to understand the detail of your project. So, you know, what's the history of your building? Why do people care about it? Why is it important? What's going to happen if that building isn't there? What are the other options for that building? You know, why is it in the condition that it's in? What, you know, there's a lot of detail that I think that, you know, with kind of normal standard cases for support, you could probably kind of skim over and kind of be like, oh, well, you know, we're going to do this youth project, we're going to, you know, but with a capital project, I think you really have to get under the hood of it, because you're going to have to make sure that whether you're asking for £1 million or £25,000 or £5,000, that you're able to ask that funder for their money, and that you're clear about what their money specifically is going to allow you to achieve. So you kind of have to kind of become kind of capital program experts light in order to give your applications the best chance. The don'ts, I guess, you know, communication is kind of an obvious one, but you know, there are a number of stakeholders within a capital project that are going to be interested in your project, both from the kind of the community that's going to benefit and use the building, but also, you know, like I said, MPs and councillors and the local authority. You know, there's a number of people that you might not have thought of that will suddenly then appear and kind of have something to say about your project or program. So just making sure that you're kind of keeping people up to date, even when you haven't really got a lot to say. So at the moment, because we're doing a lot of work around the repair of the building, there isn't really a lot that we can get people involved with, but we're still trying to keep on top of going to the community neighbourhood meetings and send regular emails out and kind of have, you know, regular kind of hosted kind of meetings so that we can make sure that we check in with people. And I guess the capital projects can get really expensive really quickly. You can end up paying for a lot of time for other people to tell you what you already know. And so just kind of going back to the thing about investing your own time is that there aren't really any shortcuts. And so if you are going to commission, you know, a survey or piece of market research or something like that, make sure that you're really going to get what out of it, what you're paying for. Not just paying for somebody to tell you what you kind of already know or could have found out through a conversation with a, you know, a local community connector or something like that. And yeah, I kind of think this is always a key one for me, is not letting great be the enemy of good. You know, a capital project can easily get to a point where by the time you've raised a bit of money, your costs are probably going to be higher than the money that you've raised, and you can end up potentially chasing that money to nowhere and never deliver anything. So really thinking about what is the money that you need right now, you know, what is the best that you can do with the funds that are available, and that will help to nudge the project along and potentially unlock future investment when funders can see the projects moving, as opposed to it just being a kind of an abstract target. And the kind of, I guess, Jerry Springer's sort of final thoughts is that kind of capital projects aren't linear. And so by that, I mean, it's, you know, funders tend to want to be like, you know, A to Z and start this fund in 3 months of getting it and finish within 12 months of receiving it and all of those things. So, you know, just being really prepared to be as honest and pragmatic with your funders as possible, because I think particularly when funders kind of, once a funder's bought into your idea and your vision, it can be then much easier to kind of flex some of those, even some of the most rigid parameters of some of even the most kind of strictest funders, because everybody wants to see a positive outcome. So just trying to nudge it all forward. And yeah, like capital projects will always take more time and resource than planned. So, you know, be prepared for that outcome, and being prepared to sort of, you know, to do more fundraising at some point in the future, and maybe get something done now and something else happen in the future. And yeah, a building's never going to be finished, so try and embrace perfection along the way. Just to kind of give you a bit of an idea, when I first started at Trinity, we put a lift in, and that lift is now coming to the end of its lifespan. So we're looking at kind of options for fundraising to replace, well, potentially either recondition or replace that lift. So that's another potentially sort of 40 to sort of 80,000, depending on whether we go for repair or replacement. So yeah, these projects are kind of never finished. So just kind of, you know, keep on trucking. And that's it from me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then hand back over to Mike and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was absolutely fascinating to hear a bit more about the process involved. It's a project I've been sort of vaguely familiar that's been happening in Bristol for a while, not least through your kind of excellent social media updates. But really interesting to learn a bit more about like the way you've cut it up into phases, and particularly how you engage public support. And yeah, that Polis tool sounds really interesting. So that's something I'm going to check out as well. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask, if you would like to either pop them in the chat box, or if you'd like to ask them verbally, you're very welcome to raise your hand, and we will come to people in turn. We've already got a couple of things coming in, so let me just open the chat box. Well, there's a comment from Caroline Hall saying incredible work, congratulations for everything you've done so far, and a question from Katie Harding, just to query the name of the decarbonisation company that you use.
So the firm that we're working with is a firm called Burrow Happold. I'll just write it in the chat. And they run a scheme where you can kind of, it's like a kind of angels thing where you can apply and they'll gift a bunch of time to projects that are kind of, that pique their team's interests. So you kind of get to do a bit of a kind of Dragon's Den pitch to them about your idea. And then they kind of, if they like it, they'll gift you time to do a bunch of kind of surveys and give you some recommendations that kind of then help for some of those more specific funds around kind of, there's a few green energy funds around at the moment that we're hoping that their recommendations will help us to lever support from. How's that?
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, the chat box is already scrolling so quickly that I'm going to try and keep up with the questions coming in, and then there's a couple of hands up as well, so that's a really good sign. There was a question in the chat box from Anna Little saying, have you sought financial support yet from individuals and major donors? I know that was somewhere in your phase plan, particularly later on, but yeah, it'd be interesting to know.
I think because the building is, what we're trying to do is be super honest about this, the prospect of this project working. So we've sort of said this is a bit of a leap of faith at the moment, and you know, it could still not work. We could still hit a bit of a showstopper with it, and so we've just tried to sort of be quite sort of measured in our kind of asks at the moment. So really sort of targeted towards kind of warm funders who we know we've got relationships with, who we know that, you know, will then also kind of buy into this kind of approach, and this sort of journey of discovery. We are planning some kind of more kind of individual giving and kind of major donor fundraising, but it's the kind of time that that's going to take and the investment that's going to take, whereas the phase that we're in at the moment, there's a bit of a kind of sense of urgency that that I just don't think lends itself to like real sort of nurturing those sort of individual giving relationships at this point, but potentially with the sort of phase 2 works where we're also then possibly able to get people into the building again, so we're able to build that engagement around the visions. People can kind of be in the space and see it and see the potential. I think that will help us to kind of explore that more fully as part of the kind of the phase 2, I think.
Thank you. And I'll take one more question from the chat box because it kind of links in with what you were just saying. So Kat Watts had asked, when there's so much to do, how do you decide what parts of the work do you put into each phase? It's clear you've done a lot of planning there, and I imagine that was quite a
Yeah.
kind of important but tricky design process.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's sort of like that. It's that kind of risk matrix, isn't it? Where you're like the kind of amount of money and the likelihood of securing that. And I think say with something like community ownership fund, that fund, is sort of intended exactly for buildings like this, buildings that are at risk of loss or disposal or kind of demolition, to save it for community use. And so kind of, that was also one of the, as much as, we were kind of intending to, I guess, proceed with this project, we could only proceed on the basis that there was some major funds that would likely land. And so it was sort of being able to sort of hedge our bets with these are the kind of more likely, more fruitful sources, as opposed to say something like individual giving or some of the smaller trusts and foundations where, we could be making the same amount of effort for a 5 or 10k ask, and have less likelihood of securing that. But we have actually, as part of community ownership fund, there's a revenue contribution, so we're just also about to take on a fundraiser who's going to be working with us to explore some of these sort of smaller trusts and foundations to kind of develop a more kind of sophisticated individual giving plan, and then to sort of start looking at what other sort of sources of funds there are out there, because obviously I guess I'm sort of doing the fundraising but in and around running Trinity as well, so it's sort of I've kind of got to go with what I know is more likely to work as opposed to something that might feel a bit more speculative.
Yeah, and I like how you've had that focus as well on trying to make it have that visible and tangible sense of progress before you go to other funders as well, because it's quite difficult with a project as large as this in a very kind of crisis-driven funding landscape, isn't it? It's nice to have the progress to really bring it to life.
Yeah, definitely. I think like you said, the point that you made at the start about kind of COVID and the timings of this project, it doesn't really lend itself to capital fundraising really at the moment, because there are so many other pressures. And so people are like, well, why would I give money to a building when I could be giving to, responding to the cost of living crisis, supporting services. And so it's really kind of again, like I said, linking it back to that vision and the impact, and that the building is a means to an end to deliver a kind of responsive offer, as opposed to just a building because it's kind of nice to have and people like it a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've had a couple of people waiting very patiently with their hands up, so thanks, Alex and Caroline as well. I think, Alex, you marginally got there first, so if you'd like to come in with your question, then we'll go to Caroline next.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Emma. That was a really interesting session, and really exciting project as well. My question is kind of quite similar to the other ones, I suppose, looking at different income streams. And I was wondering, with the amount of public engagement that you've had, have you considered, or will you be considering crowdfunding as a way of bringing in income? Perhaps not now, but like at a later stage.
Yeah, sure. So we have got a crowdfunder that we did launch, but again, like I said, we haven't really invested the time in it to kind of drive income through that source. I guess like from my own fundraising backgrounds, I'm definitely more of like a trust and foundations fundraiser than a individual giving expert. So I tend to sort of focus on, like I said, the bids where I know that my energy is going to potentially pay off, as opposed to like with individual giving, which there's a lot of kind of like energy that you have to put in, and that continual ask that kind of has to happen, and that continual sort of stewardship of donors. And again, mainly sort of similar to the individual like major donors, it's more that if somebody kind of gives a small amount now, like they may not get to sort of see that benefit realized in a way that's going to pay off to them. So that's why I'm sort of really trying to focus that more. Once we've got the repair phase underway, we can start to build engagement around the site and the building. then we can start to kind of ramp that up a little bit to sort of say, well, actually, now we're maybe going to spend some money on doing this room, and your money can contribute to renovating this area, as opposed to, so it's just trying to give people something, I guess, tangible. So while we've got a kind of, I guess, a kind of a fund surfer out there live, we haven't really pushed it really hard yet.
Thanks, Emma. Caroline, would you like to ask your question next?
Sure, thank you. Two small ones, if I may. Very specific though. One was that given the building's been sort of, dormant and unused for a while, how was it hard then to frame the sort of urgency, like why now question? And then the second one is just, I know we're a bit of a way along on this, but given that you seem unbelievably chilled about taking on this huge thing, was it a case of, did it ever feel like it would be too much to take on, and then that was something to sort of work through, or was it, and then how did you do that, or was it just so obviously something that you wanted to take on, or knew the organization could from the start?
So I guess, so why now? I think the thing that kind of gave it the sense of urgency was because there was this sort of bid on the table to reinstate it as a pool, and that kind of fell through. It then sort of placed this pressure on the local authority to kind of dispose of it. So then it did sort of create this kind of heightened sense of urgency that, like, if we don't do something, take action now, once it's sort of gone, there's no kind of getting it back. And the likelihood would be with a building like that, it would be potentially bought speculatively, and you'd end up with, another Grosvenor hotel where, somebody sits on the site for a long time and then it eventually falls down. So that kind of did kind of create a bit more, like, sort of public profile, I suppose, to kind of push it. And then also, I guess, that it aligned with the national context and the community ownership fund. So it was a bit of a case of the stars aligning, I think. Also with our own involvement, like I said, we'd sort of looked at possibly taking this building on through a community asset transfer in 2017, and we decided just to support a kind of consortia bid instead of pursuing a bid ourselves, because we didn't really have the capacity, and it would have been sort of biting off like more than we could chew then. Now it is definitely still like a daunting prospect, certainly for our board of trustees. Like, it wasn't like when I said at the start of January, let's pursue this, that they were all like, yeah, this is great. I think particularly some of the newer trustees were just like, well, where has this come from? What are you talking about? Why are you thinking about doing this now, when, like you said, the context is sort of post-COVID, cost of living, arts organisations are under a lot of pressure. I guess my view is that, like, rightly or wrongly, that the arts are there to kind of give hope and inspire people of the art of the possible, and but also to say that, we are trying and it may not work, but you kind of have to give it a go, and this is the kind of the best option for this building right now, to have an organisation who's got a bit of a track record, who can try and realise some of the community and cultural potential of the space within a kind of an affordable, modest, phased repair and renovation scheme. And so we'll just give it a go and see what happens. Hopefully, it will be a positive outcome, but if not, there'll be a lot of learning and a lot of growing.
That's definitely the positive spin on it, isn't it, Emma? Thank you, and thanks, Caroline. Great question. So we've got a couple more questions in the chat box. So firstly, from Julie Cole, asking whether you could give a few more reflections or advice on the different fundraising approaches needed for different audiences. So I guess particularly where you've gone for the statutory funding and things like the community ownership fund versus some of the local trusts and foundations. And yeah, Julie was asking that in relation to both applying for funding and then reporting back on impact.
I think with all of the funders, both the kind of local funders and the kind of national funders, it's a lot about kind of risk. It's a lot about how you're showing them that this is a project that, like, is likely to happen, and that you've thought about the risks. So I think a lot of people probably will have quite large capital projects in their, peripheries where, people like funders will have committed funds, and then projects costs will go up, and then that kind of leaves funders sort of also feeling like, well, we pledged for one thing and now it's becomes something different. So I think that's where the phasing kind of comes into its own, because you're giving the funder the bit of the project that they are funding in a kind of timely way, as opposed to saying, well, you're funding this bit, but we've got to raise another 10 million before we get to doing that bit. Oh, and then by the way, now we raise that 10 million, it's now more like 20 million. And so it just sort of becomes this never ending thing that you're chasing. So, but I think with the local funders, it was much more about, the hearts and minds stuff, that people, like I said, have seen this building on their doorstep and wondered, oh, wouldn't it be great if, it was back in use and the community could be using it. And so much more tapping into that kind of local context. Whereas I think with kind of national funders, it's particularly at the moment, it's much more around the kind of, kind of this sort of leveling up agenda, the kind of regeneration kind of angle of like, how does a building like this contribute within its locality and create jobs and create a sense of place and kind of contribute to those kind of wider national kind of agendas, I suppose.
And I assume, particularly with those bigger national funders in mind, you presumably played on Trinity's track record quite a lot as well, because you've obviously done so much with your building. I think one of the questions funders always have is this organisation a safe pair of hands to kind of have grants that big and deliver projects successfully?
I think that's it, definitely. So like that was sort of, again, one, when we did look at this at the beginning, we did a bit of an options appraisal of like, could we support the community association to constitute a new legal entity to take this building on, and then we just support with like fundraising efforts, and just it became really kind of apparent that was just not going to work, like, because the funders are looking for, like you said, that track record and that certainty that if we don't make it work, it's because there's going to be circumstances hopefully outside of our control, as opposed to the funders have kind of trusted that because of our track record we're more likely to realise this vision for the centre. Yeah,
brilliant, thank you so much. And then we've got a question which I'll take as the last question we've got for now. So if anyone else has any final questions, then do pop your hand up now or get typing in the chat box with very speedy fingers, because we're nearly out of time. But there was a question from Teresa Jones just asking about the shape of your fundraising team and how much support you've had, particularly probably looking on Envisy at how much ground it looks like you've covered already. And I know you said you've been doing that with multiple hats on, including the small matter of running Trinity as well.
So our like I said, in 2017 we didn't do this because mainly I was the only fundraiser, and I was fundraising for Trinity and also running the kind of venue. Our kind of management structure now is that we've got a director of culture who kind of oversees our venue and live program, and then our deputy chief executive oversees all of our creative children, young people services, and he does a lot of fundraising as well. So he'll fundraise for a lot of our main kind of program, our revenue fundraising. So that's kind of given me loads of spare time to fundraise for a really old building and do it up. I think also there is a kind of level of a slight level of obsession and insanity going on. I'm pretty sure that some of my board are still just like, well, she's doing it now, so we might as well support her. But no, I think that these are kind of passion projects, I suppose, and so this is why you kind of have to, like I said, invest your own time in kind of getting under the hood of it and really kind of caring about it yourself. I always think with fundraising, you write the best cases of support when it's things you really, really want to see happen. So that definitely helps as well. If you love it, then other people will hopefully buy into your mad vision.
I think there's a bit of mad vision involved with all of the best fundraising projects, aren't there? Sometimes.
That's right, yeah.
Just a quick question that snuck in really quickly at the end from Julie Cole, just clarifying: is the trustee board separate for Trinity and Jacob Wells, and also is that on the agenda at any point in the process?
So at the moment, we've actually had some input from the Cooperative Assistance Network, and they've helped to look at kind of governance and structure. So for now, we have just kept the same trustee structure with a capital lead. So we've got one board member who's the lead of this project. Mainly, again, like I said, because we're in this repairs phase, so it's very difficult to kind of engage a new board around a sort of decision-making kind of structure around kind of program and operations and things where there's not really a lot to input in. But potentially going forward, we'd be looking at having a kind of a sort of subsidiary model where there'd be a sort of separate board. So we are a charity with a trading subsidiary at the moment, so potentially a sort of similar structure with a sort of CIC with shares, and then that also then helps along with that individual giving idea that we might be able to kind of do a shares offer as part of the phase 2 fundraising, where we can then build that individual support and build some local support around governance going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for all those questions. It's really helped to draw out some more information about the project. Some really good questions there. And yeah, most of all, thank you so much to you, Emma, for giving us a whistle-stop tour of that. That as an amazing piece of work. We are pretty much out of time now. So just a reminder, there will be a feedback form coming out by email afterwards, just to get your feedback on the session, which would be really helpful for us as a committee. But also, please do share your thoughts on other topics you'd like us to cover in future, and any speakers you'd be particularly keen to hear from, and we will do our best to work that into the agenda for the rest of the year as well. The next session is coming up. Alex, I don't actually have the date to hand, but I think it's towards the end of March. There'll be an email about that in due course, but we're doing another Meet the Funder event with the 4 who are a funder of smaller charities in particular. So for those of you that have known a little bit about the 4, perhaps replied previously and want to understand a bit more about them, but also I just find those sessions fascinating in terms of understanding what makes a funder tick and how they make decisions and things like that, again, then please do join us for that at the end of next month. But yeah, just a huge thank you again to you, Emma. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully see you at another event soon. Take care.
Thanks all.